Today my topic is the Gospel of Thomas. And I chose that because this month's power, we know we have the 12 powers or faculties, and we have one for each month. And the power for this month is understanding. And the disciple that represents understanding is Thomas, popularly known as Doubting Thomas. Now there is a book out called 12 Ordinary Men by John MacArthur. And he tells us a little bit about each of the disciples, because you don't hear about the disciples. And I'm interested in that. And, because you look at them and you say, well, why did Jesus choose this person to represent this faculty? So I like to kind of delve into that a little bit. And this is a good book for doing that if you're ever interested. The thing about the disciples to know is that they were not extraordinary men. They were just like you and me. Jesus didn't want high scholars and theologians and learned people as his disciples. He wanted people that the people he was going to be teaching to be able to relate to. How are you going to relate to somebody who's using scholarly language and you may never have been to school? So that's why Jesus chose the men that they were, ordinary people. And one such person was Thomas, and he's a disciple that represents understanding, as I said. And he was nicknamed Doubting Thomas. And we'll tell you about why in a moment. But according to MacArthur, that's just the surface. He says that Thomas was a negative Nelly, or Ned, if you will. He was a worrywart. He was a brooder. He tended to be anxious and angst-ridden. You ever seen Eeyore and Winnie the Pooh? He's always complaining. He's anticipating the worst. Pessimism rather than doubt seems to have been Thomas' besetting sin. So if you tell Eeyore it's beautiful outside today, he's going to say it's too hot, or it's not hot enough, or it's going to find something wrong. And that was kind of the way Thomas was, according to MacArthur. Now, we don't see Thomas mentioned in Matthew, Mark, and Luke other than to say that he was one of the 12. But we do get some insight into Thomas in the book of John. He's only mentioned, as I said, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke the one time, and that's when they talk about the group together. So we learned everything that we know about Thomas from the book of John. Now, in spite of being a negative Ned, Thomas did have some redeeming characters, like we all do. Even the worst person has some good qualities. And I'm not saying he was a bad person. He just, he was not optimistic like the rest. He wasn't all in. Remember that phrase from a few weeks back? So one of these incidents that reflected Thomas' character was in the death and the subsequent resurrection of Lazarus. And we all know that story, right? We're all familiar with it. Jesus was close to that family, which consisted of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. He loved them, and whenever he needed some R&R, he would go to Bethany and stay a while, or bide a while, with this family. Now, Jesus had taken his disciples and gone out into the wilderness. It said out beyond the Jordan where John the Baptist baptized people, including Jesus. So he had gone away from Jerusalem because Jerusalem had gotten to the point where it just wasn't a good idea for Jesus to be there because he had a price on his head. So he went out to the wilderness and he preached and, he talked, he baptized people, and his ministry thrived out there in the wilderness. It was possibly the most fruitful time in Jesus' ministry. Now, everything was going well until he gets a message from Martha and Mary saying, Lazarus is dying. You have to come. There's just no way around it. You have to come. Now, this was a problem because Bethany, where the family resided, was just a stone's throw from Jerusalem. And Jesus knew that if he went that close to Jerusalem, he might be seized. It would put him in the path of dangers. So when Jesus said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it, in John 11, all the disciples probably went, breathe a sigh of relief, so we don't have to go back near Jerusalem. Good. But what Jesus meant was that Lazarus' death would not be the ultimate result of his sickness. The Son of God would glorify himself by raising Lazarus from the dead. And not only did Jesus know that Lazarus was going to die, he knew the very hour that Lazarus would die. But he deliberately tarried to give Lazarus time to die, because he knew that this was, strangely enough, an act of love, because ultimately the blessing that they received, which was the raising of Lazarus, would be greater than if he had just been healed of whatever his illness was. So after a couple days, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us go into Judea again." And the disciples looked at him like, "Are you crazy? You're going there? And they're after you? You know, what's wrong with you?" Because they knew it would probably mean certain death. But Jesus had his mind made up, and he was resolved to go back. And he said, and not only was he going to go back, he was going to go back in broad daylight, and he was going to do what he had to do in broad daylight so that he wouldn't stumble into darkness. And he was not going to hide from those so-called enemies. Again, the disciples didn't get it. You know, they were like children sometimes, and they didn't always get what Jesus was talking about. So they took it to mean that Lazarus was getting better. Oh, he must be on the mend, so there's no need for us to go. And he said, no, he had to explain to them that there was going to be no talking him out of it, because he knew what he had to do, and this would be for the glory of God. So Thomas, in verse 16, the pessimist, says, well, we should all go back. Let's be all in and all go back. So he was, in a way, he was heroic in his pessimism, because he felt, well, if Jesus is going to die, we might as well die with him. You know, so let's be all in. So he must have been persuasive, because he convinced all the disciples to show up. And he was willing to die with Jesus. He was loyal to Jesus. So now Thomas shows up again in John 14. When Jesus tells his disciples of his imminent departure, he tells them that he's going to go to prepare a place, and where I go, you know. So Thomas says, Lord, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way? In other words, you're leaving, and we will never get to where you're going, because we don't know where that is. We don't know how to get there. And anyway, how are we supposed to get there? It's much better for all of us to die together, so there will be no separation. If we all die together, we will be all in. But if you just go, how are we ever going to find you? We don't know what to do. So Thomas' devotion was such that he didn't want to live without Jesus. But we know that Jesus was leaving, because he knew that if he didn't leave, the disciples wouldn't do anything on their own. So he was leaving, and he told them he was leaving. So then Thomas' worst fears come to life, and Jesus dies without him. He dies on the cross. And we see him mentioned again in John 20:24 after the death of Jesus, when it says that Thomas, called the twin, was not with them, because Thomas Didymus is the name, and he's called the twin. And I forgot to mention that we don't know who the twin was, we just know he was a twin. And I know that when I was teaching, and I would have twins, we had teachers, all of us, not just me, had a bad habit of saying, the twin so-and-so, or the twin so-and-so. So no wonder twins sometimes don't feel like they have any individuality, that they don't have separate personality. So anyway, Thomas wasn't with them. There were only 10 of them, because the disciples fled, and they went to what's called the upper room. And I mentioned last time I was here about them receiving the Holy Spirit. So they went into the upper room, and they were all locked up. It was like a fortress up there, because they were afraid that the Romans were going to come and get them. So they kind of barricaded themselves in. But in the middle of all of this, Jesus comes. You know, it's like, how in the world did he do that? Nobody can get in here. He comes and he says to them, peace be with you. Then he showed them his hands and his side. And the 10 disciples were just ecstatic. Too bad Thomas missed the whole thing. Where was Thomas? Well, we don't know, but we can guess that he was probably somewhere indulging in his misery. You know, you ever have those days sometimes when, you know, sometimes you just want to be miserable. And you don't want to stay in it long, but, you know, it's just, oh, nothing's going right. I just need, oh. And you just want to stay in bed all day. And this might have been what Thomas was all about. He didn't want to be with the crowd, not even if the crowd was his like-minded friends. So when Thomas did rejoin the group, the others told him, oh, we saw Jesus. He was here. We saw his wounds. And Thomas said, unless I see his hands, the print of the nails, and put my finger into the print of the nails, and put my hand in his side, I won't believe it. So this statement brought about the nickname Doubting Thomas. So we probably all know her, Doubting Thomas, or Crepe Hanger. But we can't be too hard on Thomas, though, because when Mary Magdalene comes back and tells them that Jesus is not in the tomb, they didn't believe her. So we can't be too hard on Thomas. You know, that's an extraordinary thing for somebody to present to you. There were 2 disciples that were on the road to Emmaus, and they don't say which 2 they were. And they walked with Jesus for a long time before they even realized that that was Jesus. Oh, wow. So when Jesus came back 8 days later, he looked directly at Thomas, because nobody had to tell him what Thomas was all about. He already knew. And he said, reach your finger here, talking about his wounds, and look at my hands, and reach your hand here, and put it into my side. Do not be unbelieving, but believing. And Jesus was very tender and patient with him, just as Spirit is with us when we have those days and when we don't quite understand. So it was at that point that Thomas received the gift of spiritual understanding and said, my Lord and my God. See, Thomas got it instantly. He was the doubter, but once he got it, and he knew that he knew. And at that point, he had been transformed from a moody, melancholic, negative personality to a great evangelist. And then a short time later, we talked about the Pentecost. Along with the other apostles, he received the Holy Spirit and were empowered for ministry, and they were engaged with, were given the proposition to take the message throughout the world. He and his comrades took the gospel to the ends of the world, and ancient testimony says that his grave is in India, because it was said that that's how far he got. So there's a small hill there near the airport in Chennai, now called Madras, India, where Thomas is said to have been buried. And in 1945, when they found the Nag Hammadi scriptures, the scrolls, this was one of the things that was discovered, the Gospel of Thomas. Mm-hmm. Now, there have all kinds of things been said about this. Thomas didn't write it, you know. We don't really know, but they found this, and this has different sayings of Jesus that give us a different perspective from what we read in our Bible. So what is this gift of understanding that Thomas received? Well, I turn to Emily Cayley, Lessons in Truth, for that, because this is one of my favorite books, and I refer to it all the time. So just a few ideas about what spiritual understanding is. First of all, it's a divine idea in the mind of God. It's absolute intelligence and pure knowingness. It is not a definite form of knowledge, but rather absolute knowingness, it says. We know that we know. In man, it's one of our 12 spiritual faculties, the faculty of understanding, that work along with the other 11. and it has the ability to perceive meaning and the truth that stands under all shifting to phenomena and outer appearance. Because to understand means to stand under. So what is the foundation? Understanding is a foundation. Increase of spiritual understanding is attained only by greater development of our consciousness as a whole. That's what we do here. We develop our consciousness. It's increased in exactly the same manner that all the other powers are built, are increased through the study of truth, meditation on divine ideas, prayer, denials and affirmations, communion with God, and all the conscious conditioning taught by spiritually enlightened religions, such as unity. I said that, she would say it. Jesus himself gives us the only correct answer as to how it was that Peter was designated the I am of Jesus as the Christ. Jesus said that it was only the Father within Peter which had revealed this truth, not the flesh and blood of outer appearances. So therefore Peter becomes the disciple that represents faith. So what is spiritual understanding compared to intellectual knowledge? Well, intellectual knowledge is good. You know, that's what we do. We go to school to study intellectual knowledge. And it's actually the forerunner of spiritual understanding. It's the result of good gathering of facts in all their forms. And even though all these facts are true, knowledge of them does not necessarily reveal their truth, inner or universal meaning. Only spiritual understanding can do that. So all wisdom is a discernment of meaning. Any person with enough retention of facts can be quite knowledgeable, but not necessarily wise or understanding. This brings to mind, I would say, some of our politicians, maybe. Only one person who discerns meaning is wise. Only the person who discerns the meaning is wise. And the person who sees truth as the ultimate meaning of all things, such a person has spiritual understanding. They have that foundation. So what's the difference between curing and true healing? Well, curing, that is healing of the condition, can be achieved even by just speaking words of truth from the intellectual plane of consciousness. And we've seen people do this, and we've had examples of that. Curing can be achieved in any number of ways, and that's good. Now, the words true healing, as used here, designate something more than the curing of a condition. They refer to an absolute or permanent healing. This means that you're never going to become ill again because illness-causing errors have been removed from consciousness. Unity principle number 3, we create our experiences by the activity of our minds, and everything has a spark in thought. I was just happened to be listening to good old Joel Osteen this morning. I like Joel. You know, he doesn't agree on some points, but I like Joel. And he was talking about how having a hereditary illness, that doesn't mean you're going to get it. So if you develop your consciousness and your spiritual understanding, you don't have to get a so-called hereditary illness. And this was good news for me because we have a lot of them in the line. So permanent health is the true estate of man. But until this is achieved, curing of conditions is still very much needed. And we need to cure some conditions. Wow, we got a lot of work to do. And it's always possible. And this is so even before negative causes are removed or overcome in consciousness. So that's the good news. Now, the other thing about spiritual understanding is I cannot reveal God to another directly. None of us can. But we can be instrumental in helping them to do so indirectly. So we bring them the good news. When we talk about the good news, we keep our thoughts and speech on a higher level, on a spiritual level. So in that way, we can indirectly affect another person. But the actual revealing has to come from within the person himself, from his own indwelling God. So they could have talked to Thomas till they turned blue in the face. You know, I don't care what you saw. You know, until I see it and until I feel those wounds, I'm not going to believe it. That had to come from within him. Nobody could talk him into that. Now, beseeching or begging. You know, Charles Fillmore was not a big fan of getting down on your knees. You know, and that's in my religious tradition. I don't do it anymore. We don't have to. We don't have to, because all that the Father has is ours, and all we have to do is ask. Children of the King, when they go to the King, they look him straight in the eye and they ask for what they want. So beseeching was not a good thing as far as Charles Fillmore understanding, because he said that's not going to bring spiritual understanding. It won't prevent it, but asking results in receiving. Belief hastens the process of receiving. Unbelief retards the process, and so do doubt and fear. But these need not prevent the eventual receiving unless they cause a cessation of asking. So Thomas didn't stop asking. So if you stop asking, well, you're not going to get anything. So Thomas didn't stop asking. So as long as we continue asking, the answer will come. Spiritual understanding will not come to one who is seeking it with selfish motives either. The reason is that selfish motives are not really seeking spiritual understanding. That's an impossibility in terms. Selfishness may be seeking many, many things, but spiritual understanding will instantly destroy this selfishness. So we see that there was no selfishness in Thomas. He took up the cause and he went with the other disciples out to spread the word. So now what if we ask for spiritual understanding and don't receive it? The reason would be the same as asking for any spiritual blessing and not receiving. There is something wrong with our asking. And this is referred to in the Bible in the words, you ask and do not receive because you ask amiss. James 4:3. You ask for what is for the highest good and the greatest joy. You know, I hear stories from people who work in the prayer room in Silent Unity, and I have them on speed dial, by the way. And they say that people will call in and ask for, you know, this woman is with my husband and I want her to die. You know, that's asking amiss. That is asking amiss. Because maybe you're not supposed to be with that person. Maybe you're supposed to be with someone else and you're blocking your good. So we must be certain that we do not ask amiss. And the word amiss is an ideal choice of a word because the word could mean many things. But it's not an overly strong, harsh word, and that's good. You know, because we could say, well, you know, you don't have it because you don't know how to ask. You know, so just go on, you know. So we ask amiss. It would seem that we need go no further than the word because it says enough. So if one is not receiving what he is asking from God, somehow that asking is amiss. What are you asking for? That's all we need to know. But from that point on, one should cease all further negative cause seeking and go right into more positive, persistent, affirmative prayer. Results will come. Perhaps first there will be a change in the form of the asking, but good results will come. So when we pray, we don't ask for a person to be healed. We ask for whatever is for their greatest good. Maybe it's not going to be for their greatest good to be healed. Maybe they need to let go and go on. So we don't know. So we ask for whatever is the highest and best for that person. And then we leave the rest to God. So what are steps in attaining spiritual understanding? Well, first of all, you have to want it. You know, desire is the same requisite, the prime requisite for all spiritual accomplishment. Now, the second thing you have to do is remember that it's already within us, called understanding. It's one of the 12. It's one of the disciples that serve our Christ nature. And we will remember that this faculty is spiritual in character and has a spiritual purpose. If we are truly aware of this, then our meditation, prayer, and affirmation for greater spiritual understanding will have swift and spectacular results. So the minute Thomas put his hand on those wounds, he knew. And he might have known better than some of the other people who were in that room. He knew instantly, and he knew that he knew. And the third one is to ask yourself, why do I want to increase my understanding? What am I going to do with it? So what are you going to use it for? Are you going to use it for the highest good and greatest joy of all? Are you going to use it or try to use it for selfish motives? There's really no such thing as that. But ask yourself, what am I going to do with it? Why do I want it, and what am I going to do with it? Now, when we attain spiritual understanding, we have good results. We have clearer insight, more serenity, new degrees of greatness, a changed tone that allows us to rise above the opinions of others and dwell in the hour that now is. So there's a book by Terry called Whitaker that says, what you think of me is none of my business. Good book, by the way. So you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. Spiritual understanding frees us from the bondage of belief in outer appearances, but we are able to discern the meaning within all things and the truth, which stands under all meanings. So I've heard it said many times before, and presently a lot, that the world is going to HE double hockey sticks in a handbasket. I choose to see the wonderful things in the world, and I know that you do too. That's my definition of spiritual understanding. Now, she asked the question, can you do too much spiritual seeking? And Katie says we can never do too much of anything that is truly, truly spiritual. We should never connect the words too much with anything that's genuinely of spirit, just as we would never use the words too late when speaking of anything of spirit. So it was not too late for Thomas to get it. And when he did get it, he got it instantly. If any person's motives are based in spirit, then spirit itself will prevent or correct any unbalance in the person's efforts. If a person is showing symptoms of too much one-sidedness or obsession, then it indicates a pathological motivation, not a truly spiritual one. So that's the other thing we need to check for. And then the last one here is the law of growth. The law of growth can be found in just one word, evolution. And I know that's a controversial term nowadays in some quarters. But all things in the universe are in the process of becoming, including you and me. There's no purely static thing in God's creation. Everything is evolving. And this is true of an atom, of a continent, of the planet itself, and it's especially true of men. I once went to a lecture with a psychic, very interesting man, and he said, if you're not growing, you're going. So, which way do we want to grow? Do we want to grow up towards spirit, or, what do we want to do? So God has created a living universe, and anything that is living must be growing, for growth is life. We cannot receive understanding of the whole Spirit of God at once, or indeed ever, for the reason is that God is infinite. There is no end to God. Infinite means cannot be encompassed. No matter much of yet more is attained, there is still more to get. So it never runs out. The well never runs dry in this case. But man will always keep trying, keep growing, and finding happiness in the fact that there is always more of God for him to comprehend and to see. And that's the good news. Thank you. And now for our time of meditation. accountability principle, God is absolute good and everywhere present. And number 2, we have that same spark of divinity in us through the activity of our minds. Everything has a spark in thought. So if you're seeking spiritual understanding or any spiritual quality, what is your thinking? We achieve spiritual understanding and all the other faculties that we possess through prayer and meditation or God mind. These bring forth wisdom, healing, prosperity, and everything that is good. Knowing and understanding, or what stands under the laws of life, also called true, are not enough. So we must live the truth we know. So let's concentrate on our faculty of understanding for a moment. Spiritual understanding brings about true spiritual prosperity, as said in today's daily word. So let us just go deep within. Just know our oneness with God. And when we know our oneness with God, we get it. And like Thomas, we know that we know that we know. And we can become all in. So let's just take a few moments to ask. And to ask rightly for spiritual understanding. Perhaps there is a situation, a person, a feeling that may have come over you that you don't understand. So at this moment, ask God, Spirit, Divine Mind, whatever you want to call it, ask for spiritual understanding and insight that will help you to deal with that situation. So let's just take a few moments to do that. Identify the situation, the person, and ask. Ask aright for understanding, to be able to see it correctly in the light of God. We know that the answer to all questions, to all challenges, is in the light. So now let's ask for that light to come in and provide spiritual understanding that we seek. And as we begin to come back to this time, this place, know that even if we did not get the answer, if we continue to contemplate in the silence through prayer and meditation, the answer will surely come. There will be a light that leads the way to spiritual understanding. The answer may come now, in a week. And be patient and know that it will surely come. And we will be like doubting Thomas, and we will know that we know that we know. And so it is. Oh. joy in knowing that we can always go to this place. We can always seek the Father. We can always seek and find the spiritual understanding that we desire.
Number 70.
Large prayer.
70.
Lord's Prayer.
The Lord's Prayer.